understand.
There's so many friendly faces here.
No, I think you
This is
pulled
gonna
it
be
off.
fun.
Yeah, I think so.
How do you mean?
Yeah, is this working? Oh,
I'm
okay.
chairman of that
Hello,
board.
hello everyone.
So I
Guys,
understand.
sorry.
I know, I understand that journey.
So sorry for the delay. This is not really working for me. I'm so sorry for the delay. Basically, Yankuba, who's one of, the guy you saw in the film, he's on his way from the airport, so that's why we're waiting a little bit. But I'm just going to go ahead and start. Thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see some friendly faces in the audience. Thank you to the filmmakers for the incredible film. Yeah, another round of applause. Should I bend it? Is that okay? Am I going to break it? I'm so nervous. Is that fine? Okay, that's good. So I'm just going to, mention a bit about the Frontline Club. The Frontline Club is an amazing place. It's for not just storytellers, but, they really focus on truth tellers. And they have been amazing and very supportive of refugees. They've hired refugees to work here. They've supported refugee organizations. And so it's, really a pleasure to have it here. Thank you to Max and Grant for organizing this. So, yeah, I'm going to tell you why I'm here, because I'm a bit random. Daisy is a friend of mine, Daisy, one of the directors, and she told me about it and said, she wants to create as big an impact as possible. And I thought, what better place than to do it here at the Frontline Club? I've worked with a lot of migrants, a lot of refugees. Some of them are here, actually. And I really care about this cause, and I think, that at the moment, there's a real shift in refugee coverage, and with everything happening with Brexit, tonight, and climate migrants in Australia, and we've got Iran and Syria, and mental health in general is just getting worse. I think it's very topical, and so it's good to be having these discussions now. Okay, I'm going to start with Trump's worst nightmare. We're going to be talking about migration and facts. I'm going to start with some facts, some statistics. So in the EU, in Europe, there are over 1 million asylum seekers. And in the UK, there are 45,000 asylum seekers and 127,000 refugees. Those are big numbers, so it doesn't matter if you forget them. But I'm going to ask the audience to do a task for me before I talk to the panel. I want you guys to think of two facts that you think you know about the asylum seeking process. And unless you guys are, immigration lawyers or refugees yourselves, I'm hoping you won't know many facts. But think of two, and then hopefully by the end of this discussion, you'll come away having learned something new and, be inspired to get involved somehow with the issue. So, okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panel. First, we've got Sophia, who is, she's worked for The Guardian as a journalist and done some work for the BBC. And obviously, she made this film alongside Lou and Daisy. And so, I feel like you can talk about yourself a bit more later, but she's also set up an organization. She set up a company in Naples, which is a tour company. So if anyone goes, you should chat to her about it. She didn't ask me to say that. This is Soya Samura. So most of you probably know him. He has won Emmys, BAFTAs, Peabodys for his incredible documentaries. He's covered a lot of stories on refugees and the migration crisis. And you're a migrant yourself to this country, so you know a lot about it. So, thank you for being here today. Charlie Fraser, he set up an organization called TURN, the Entrepreneur Refugee Network, which helps refugees become entrepreneurs. They have helped over 196 entrepreneurs just last year, and you do incredible work, and it's so important to give jobs to people. So our organizations have actually worked together. I set up an organization called Timepiece, which is written up there, and we focus mainly on integration of asylum seekers and refugees. So that's the panel. Now I was going to start with talking to Yankuba, but he's not here, so we'll wait for his arrival. But maybe, Sophia, we can start with you. You can tell us what was the drive behind this, and how did you meet these guys? Like, how did you even get involved in the first place?
Am I meant to have a mic?
You are meant to have a mic. Is there not one on your chair behind you? You can shout, but...
Is that working? Oh, right, I see.
We're all going to have to be holding this all night long.
A mini mic. Okay, I'm just going to hold it.
Yeah, go for it.
It feels cooler. How did we start making the film?
Yeah, I mean, how did you even meet Yankuba and Fata and the guys?
Well, I have a tendency to tell really long stories, so I'll try and keep it short. But no, I moved to Naples in 2015, which, as we all know, was the beginning of the refugee, the midst of the refugee phenomena rather than crisis. And it felt like the right middle-class thing to do, to go and help, as we've all probably felt. Like, I don't know what to say about this, sorry, hang on a sec. Does that work?
Yeah.
So that felt the right thing to do. But I quickly found that working in these, you saw the camps, you see Yankuba living in a camp. They're not really camps, they're kind of hotels or rundown buildings, which in a sort of state of emergency, the Italian government has put these contracts out to tender for anyone, private landlords, to say, hey, I've got a spare room, I can host people. But what happened is, especially in places like Naples, rundown hotels that weren't making any money were given the opportunity to host hundreds and hundreds of migrants in putting sort of 10 people in one room and getting €35 per night per asylum seeker, which if anyone does the maths, you can quickly get into the millions. And whilst they're meant to be sort of feeding them and providing sanitation and helping them with their documents, they're just skimming all the money off and putting it into their own pockets and buying Range Rovers while people are sort of got scabies and there's mud and there's mold on the walls. And so I kind of like entered into this world and was like, Jesus Christ, this is nuts. This is, private people profiting off very vulnerable people. You had social workers that had never worked, or sort of pseudo-social workers, because there's an employment crisis in Italy. You just get any old person who'd got a random job, who knew the uncle of the man that owned the hotel, whatever, and then all these random people were working with people who had severe PTSD, seen their best friends die in the sea, in the desert, left their families, were in suffering, complete shock, and the environment was horrendous. So I kind of showed up and did some translating and didn't really want to be involved with it. So I guess I took stock, and then naturally from living in the city came across a lot of the characters that I'd met in the camps, and slowly but surely kind of gained their trust, and then on Sundays opened up my house and kind of just welcomed a whole load of or anyone who I bumped into over, and it became a kind of safe space away from the high pressure situation of these camps where they're under constant stress and from these big bullies and people that are exploiting them, and they obviously feel like merchandise. And so then my relationship with them kind of prospered, and I kept being like, you've got to understand that Naples is great. I mean, I moved here from London. Loads of history. And then they'd be like, it's terrible. And then I was so keen to show them my Naples, but something really beautiful happened that in turn they started to show me their Naples, and I was invited into their world, and through the back streets of Piazza Garibaldi, which if you read any blog will say is the most dangerous place in Europe, but actually is really quite a wonderful place full of kind of all sorts of people making their way in life and surviving with what they have. It's really quite incredible. And at that same time, I was forming relationships with Fata and Yankuba. Fata's a kind of amazing, larger-than-life character who wanted to cook Gambian food and show me how you made it. And then Yankuba was, as you saw, very intellectual, and we decided to set up a little journal where we were publishing works by migrants who wanted to express themselves.
Sorry guys. Hi, welcome. So happy you're here. We'll catch up properly afterwards. Okay, so we need to put this mic on you just quickly. Sorry, Sophia. Sophia's just telling us about how she met you and how she got involved. We just started, so don't worry about it. Just quickly, can I just ask you, Sophia? Sorry, while he's getting set up, was it ever an issue? The fact that you're this white woman, British woman, not from the same places, never gone through the migration sort of asylum-seeking process yourself. Was that ever an issue? Did that ever come up?
No, it didn't come up. I was obviously very aware of it, and I've interrogated myself about this over time and time again, and my position of privilege. And in that. But I guess there's such a basic need at such a like raw level, just for people who are trustworthy, or people that, I mean, Yankuba will tell. I mean, we have a very
maybe
close relationship, but there was such a need for safe spaces and for people. I realised without planning it that just that I wasn't part of the system but was nice was something that was so invaluable, because they didn't think I was going to be skimming money off their back or anything like that. And no, like as I said, I was invited into their world and their community, and at that point I met Daisy and Lou and introduced them to it, and Daisy was working on Exodus, and we had this joint passion we were hanging out with our pals essentially, and we wanted to kind of
document
let everyone else do that too.
Yeah. So, welcome.
Thank you.
I can't believe you've just landed. You've
Yeah,
just arrived.
it was a bit of a crazy journey, but
Yeah, you must
I'm
be.
here.
Welcome to the UK.
Thank you.
We're a friendly bunch here.
Thank you.
Nothing to be worried about.
It's like this every day.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so typical of London. Rain.
So exciting.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask you, what was it like for you to be part of this film? And I mean, were you nervous at all? How people would react? Were you really hesitant? Were you like, no, I don't want to do it, Sophia, stop making me do these things? And then, eventually got involved, or was it easy for you to just be?
For the most part, it was quite easy to get the filming done. There were some parts, though, there were some places where it was a little bit difficult to get filmed. Because I remember, if Lou at the back there, there was this day that I got my permit, my Italian permit, and we were standing just outside the Casturas, the Italian police station. And we basically got arrested, Lou and I.
Because of the filming?
Yeah,
really?
because of the filming, yeah. And we actually didn't do anything wrong. We
So
just
they got you in trouble, basically?
Yeah. Well, that was fine. We just got detained for like half an hour. And then, we went away. It was crazy. I was a little bit afraid, though, because I thought that they were going to cancel my permit. It was something I worked so hard for, many years of like waiting in limbo, with all the racism and xenophobia going on, and finally I've got this paper that detained me for
and
like.
these women
30
destroy it
minutes.
for you.
No.
Oh God.
Yeah,
That would be so much fun.
but it was really fine. When I started this documentary was Sophia, it was something that I really wanted to do. When I got to Italy, there was this environment of hate, also because politicians, like in the whole ecosystem of immigration in Italy, politicians like Matteo Salvini are the apex predators, and people like us, unfortunately, are dangling at the bottom of the food chain. So it was quite crazy. So when Sophia told me that we want to do this documentary about immigration, I was so happy. I was like, this is a jackpot for me. This is a place that, like, this is the perfect place for me to tell people my story, but also tell Italians and the world at large that migrants are not what they think they are. Migrants are more than what they think they are. Like, when they see migrants in Italy, they're like, they're stupid people, they carry diseases, they've not been to school, they're all sort of like really weird stereotypes that do not really exist. Might exist for some, but for the major part, it doesn't really happen. It doesn't really exist. But it was crazy, and
there's a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah, a lot of misconceptions, and politicians are at the forefront of giving people these misconceptions. When Matteo Salvini came up with this anti-immigrant rule, there's been this renaissance of hate and xenophobia and racism in Italy. So when Sophia came up to me and told me that we wanted to do this documentary, I was so happy. First thing, because I wanted my story to be told. I wanted people to know what migrants really are.
Have a voice.
Yeah. And secondly, Sophia is like the best person ever.
Aww,
Definitely, yeah.
That's so sweet.
Sophia.
Do you hang out a lot in Naples?
Yep.
Yeah.
Always.
Oh.
I mean, like, so that was the first day that Sophia saw me. Like, the first day, literally. Sophia invited me on Friday. You can come over to my house. We're gonna cook African food. We're gonna dance African dances.
She knows how to cook African food. Interesting.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But like, we come together like a lot of black people, migrants. We come to Sophia's house. She gives us like the place, like feel free. You can cook, you can dance. So here was someone who just opened up to me, like showed me so much love. That was something when I came to Italy I didn't see. Yeah. So I was like so willing to do this documentary with them, right? So that was the reason why.
I just, for people who don't know the difference between, a migrant, a refugee, and asylum seeker, just to give you a bit more about what happens here, specifically in the UK. We apparently, I read in a UNHCR report that we use the word migrant a lot more than we use the word refugee or asylum seeker, which is interesting. And there's a lot of weight that each word carries. Could you, Charlie, tell us a bit about the facts? I mean, it's a broad subject and it's dense, but just a bit about what are the differences and what it's like here.
Yeah, I can be the UNHCR for the evening.
Could you do represent?
So the biggest misconception is that migrant and refugees are one and the same. And obviously, if you're a refugee, you have to prove yourself to the state that you are fleeing from persecution, war, or violence. And that's what makes it so tough, because you have to go through a process of somehow proving to a state that you are fleeing from war, from violence, or from persecution. And if you think about how you actually practically do that, it is as granular as having to show messages between your friends that show that you were in danger, having to show photos that demonstrate that you were in the regions that you said you were. And that is an incredibly painful process. And it's a process that the UK does incredibly badly. On average, it takes 12 months for a decision to be made in the UK. Whilst you're waiting for your decision to be made, you cannot work. That's just your first decision. The average length of time for a successful decision is 2 years, similar to your experiences in Italy. In Italy, it's 5. Yeah. And so what that means is that in terms of integration in the UK, we're doing incredibly badly. I promise it will get more optimistic maybe as we go on, but everything around livelihoods for refugees in the UK is incredibly bleak and uniquely bleak compared to immigrants. And that's the biggest distinction, is why we focus on refugee integration as opposed to migrant integration, because if you are a refugee in the UK, it is likely that you will be poorer, that you will have less opportunity, that you will have less access to the things that you need to regain a livelihood. And that was why this conversation and this film is so important, because we need a new conversation around what it means to be a refugee in these countries.
I mean, we have a thing called the hostile environment policy, which is awful. I think you have the same thing in Italy. Is that right? You have something like the hostile... I mean, it's basically making it as difficult as possible for anyone to integrate, to start a life for themselves.
I mean, that's Italy. The hostile environment is the whole of Italy.
The whole of Italy, yeah.
So like
probably the whole of Europe at
yeah,
this point.
but
so scared,
Italy is just crazy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The worst, yeah. That's what I've heard, sorry.
Yeah, well, no, in November last year, in 2018, Salvini, who was briefly in power but is making his way back in at the moment in the regional elections, he'd signed into law his Salvini decree, which was called a security decree, which was actually the complete opposite, was not a security decree, because he was making all of the asylum seekers like Fata and Yankuba, who got this humanitarian protection, which was something that Italy really gallantly came up with the status, which is a 2-year protection status, not refugee status, which is 5 years. So it was somewhere in the middle, which was like, look, you've done this journey, you've suffered an incredible amount, you've been through Libya, we've recognised that trauma, you've got here now. If you work and if you show yourself to be a good person, you learn Italian, we'll give you this document, which kind of 70% of people got, which meant that people weren't on the streets and everything like that. And then what he did was he was like, nah, we don't want this. And so he abolished that. And so people who've got it are now kind of forced into the black market and have to get it again, have to sort of buy contracts on the black market or just sort of disappear and become invisible. And people who are arriving don't have any chance of remaining. There was a stat that said that by the end of 2020, there'll be 700,000 irregular migrants living in Italy by the end of the year. So that was, I guess, a similar type of thing. Yeah.
Sorius, I'm going to turn to you now. Do you think that your experience coming here for the first time, many years ago, was it very different? Do you think it's changed massively over time? And what was your experience of?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to the filmmakers, because this is a very, very complex story. It is difficult to tell the story. I've done quite a few immigration stories in the past, and sometimes the challenge is to win the trust of guys like these, because the reason why he's saying it was easy in Italy, by the time these guys leave home and go through all these countries, Mali, Morocco, Spain, they are battered. They are the strength. This young, because they live in their prime. Look at him. At the time they're meant to be doing something back home, giving something. That's when they leave. But by the time they get here, that's why it's even easy for you to get them to open up. But before you get here, it's tough because there is a lot of there are a lot of messages about distrust that we are fed back home with people here. So it's usually a challenge. But when I came here, so I want to thank you for you to be able to package it the way you package it and won their trust. But when I came here, I was lucky. I didn't go through the desert and stuff like that. But, I flew in because most of the migrants who are undocumented, who are here, whose lives are wasting away, who are living in limbo, flying sometimes as visitors or as students, and then because I that was how I flew into this country, and once I finished my course, just as I can't blame these guys for wanting to live the dream, I just thought, you know what, I want to work and earn money because there was a war going on in Sierra Leone. I wanted to go film the war, so I was desperate to try and make some money. But, when you technically you don't have papers to be in this country, it's two things. I know I think you mentioned one. It's the you talked about the hate.
Yeah.
But it's also the fear factor. We live in permanent fear. I used to live in this country. I see somebody with certain, we actually explain to each other what we think officials, immigration officers, the way they dress. We pass this message without even knowing. Trust me. So we see somebody with certain dress with a long Prince Charles type of coat. Man, because I used to do 3 jobs. I managed to get into the system to be able to work without work permits and stuff like that. But you see somebody coming with that kind of coat, man, in between people. So it was. It's just that fear factor, but it's also, for me, it was. Which is so good in the film because you portray the reality how these guys manage to give the world the sunshine and pretend everything is okay singing, but they compartmentalize a lot of the pain, the stress, the depression, and this is why a lot of people need to understand what some of us who go through this journey go through. Yeah.
What you talked about a bit about the film, it does show people with a lot of compassion. It's not patronizing. It's also not using the same kind of tropes you see in a lot of films, which is all about like trauma porn, but it still shows the facts, the reality for people. This is, I guess, to both of you, but also specifically to you right now, because obviously Teranga is all about nightclub and music.
Yeah.
Is that how you kept up your, the resilience and your kind of morale together through the music?
Absolutely.
Are you a musician? No.
No.
You are. Yeah, you are.
Kind of. A little bit.
Yeah.
So Teranga is a place that we all go to like socialize, to dance, and just to feel at home. Like there is this section of Naples where we all feel at home, because of music and because of we all come together. Like we are all bound by something. Like we all passed through horrific, things before we got to Naples. So coming together and like singing together and dancing together, listening to music together is our own way of forgetting the horrors of Libya, of the desert. We're lucky that we made it. So sometimes like the psychological trauma is so much. Is so great on you that you have to let it out. And the only way that we thought we could do that was going to Teranga and just singing and socializing and dancing. That was why Teranga was really, really important for literally everyone in Naples, like every migrant in Naples. It was just a hub of, you know, letting it out, letting it all out, you know.
And you don't have to speak, you know, you just listen to the music.
Yeah.
We had this I noticed in the refugee camp I volunteered in France. People were connecting just through music. Everyone in the camp knew the Titanic music, and I'm a big fan of Titanic. So we would just, you know, hang out and listen to Titanic, and, you know, it was just a way of, you know, not having to really communicate, but still create bonds between people and you know, create some sort of like happier situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like migrants need, especially migrants that come to Libya and the desert, they really need something like that. So they need something like Teranga, they need something like music. They need they need, you know, just the perfect chemistry for them to let it out. You know, I personally, I've been through hell. You know, when I left the Gambia, then went to Senegal, then Mali, then Burkina Faso,
and Libya as well.
And Libya.
I've heard that's the worst place.
That was crazy. Like crossing the desert to Libya was hell. You know, our pickup was literally running, and then like one of the guys just at the edge fell off, and the driver didn't stop. Like we were shouting literally, stop, stop, and he said no, because he said that if he stopped, they were like armed bandits around, and they were gonna get us. So we had to sacrifice him. I was literally crying. But what could I have done? Like everybody was sad. Then we got to Libya, and it was crazy because when we got to Libya, when we got to that is this small town where all migrants pass through called Saba. We were there, we weren't able to pass because there was war in Tripoli or something, and so I had to walk. I had to walk there to save up some money. I was an ice cream vendor, which I liked very well because I could steal some ice cream. And then, yeah, after that, I paid for my trip to Tripoli. Then just at the entrance, the edge of Tripoli, there was this small town. We got arrested by the police, by the immigration police or something. I think they were like militia or something. So we got arrested, and we drove overnight to a detention center, like a prison in Tripoli, in central Tripoli. I can remember the first day, the time we got there, the time we got to the prison. You know, we were like lined up in the queue. You could literally hear people inside the prison, people shouting, people moaning, you know, people crying out. And then I thought to myself, it's over for me. Like, I'm not gonna survive this. And then we got inside. You know, it's bringing back memories, but I have to say it. You know, people need to know what we passed through. People need to know who we are. People need to know that we're not just people. We're not just like anyone. We've got dreams. We've got visions. We want to make it in life. We want to study. Like, but a lot of people do not know this. When we got into the prison, it was literally dark. You couldn't see anything. On the stifling conditions were totally decrepit. We got inside, like 400 people in a very tiny space. I mean, I was literally walking on people, like shouting, because we couldn't see anything. And we were there till morning. The only time you could see the sunlight, it's in the morning when they open the door, so we get a little bit of air. But we're not allowed to go outside. And I was in those conditions for 6 months. Like I didn't have a shower for 6 months. My skin was literally peeling off. We ate once a day. We drank once a day as well. People, like someone died literally every day. That was one person who was gonna go. Like people, like if people tried to escape, they shot them. There was this one Nigerian guy who tried to escape, and they caught him. So what they did was they soaked a towel in fuel, in petrol, wrapped it around his leg and burnt him. We could literally smell like burning flesh when we were inside. So it was conditions were like, I never thought that I was going to leave. It was during the Eid al-Adha feast, the Muslim feast of Eid al-Adha, that the mayor of Tripoli came to the prison, to the detention center, and said he needed 60 people to walk on the streets of Tripoli, to clean it, the streets of Tripoli, because the feast was coming. So I was lucky, out of 400 and something people to be selected, I was in the 60 people were selected, and then we were taken to another detention center, and we started walking, cleaning the streets of Tripoli. But then after a week, I got really sick, very, very sick, and I couldn't stand. I was like, I was very weak. I vomited a lot. I couldn't eat. So the 59 other people went to work whilst I stayed back. So that was this day I had, because I could speak a little bit of Libyan Arabic, but I forgot it. That was this day that I had two guards, like, talking, and then one said to the other, that guy inside, that black person inside, is probably gonna die, and if we do not release him, we don't have a place to bury him. So what they did was, they told me to come outside. When I did, they just put me at the back of the pickup and took me to a landfill. They just dropped me there. And when I was like there for like half an hour, but then it was starting to get dark and it was getting really cold. I dragged myself to the main road, and then luckily there was this old Libyan guy with a car. He stopped and let me in, and I told him that, please take me to any place, like any place safe for me right now. If not, I'm gonna die. I literally do not have anything on me. And then he said, okay. And then he took me to Grigari. Grigari is a settlement in outskirts of Tripoli, where like black migrants are. So when I got there, I saw all the black migrants. I saw a lot of Gambians as well. And I spoke to one of them, and I said, is there any way I could go back to the Gambia? And he said, no, you can't go back to the Gambia because there is literally war all over Tripoli and in Libya, like
you're
generally.
Stuck. You can't.
Yeah, I can't go. So the only way I could have left Libya at that time was to cross the Mediterranean, and that was exactly what I did. The first time I tried to cross the Mediterranean, because it was 2 attempts actually.
How old were you, sorry, at the time?
I was 19.
Okay,
Yeah.
very young to be witnessing all of this.
So the first time I attempted to cross the Mediterranean, we were like 112 people on the rubber dinghy, and then we tried to cross, but then halfway, like, no, just a little bit, on the journey, we got our motor, the motor of the boat of the dinghy got shot, because they were like
got shot at.
Yeah, that got shot at by other people, by like other militia, and then it caught fire. All right, and some of the migrants on the boat started to panic, and they like jumped into the sea. That night, about, I think 63 people lost their lives. But I was lucky. I didn't die because there was this big rubber barrel that I held on to till the police came and they rescued me. So that when the police rescued me, I was actually in another detention center. Then that was the day that we saw a lot of people coming in. And they would like stand outside and start negotiating with the police over there. So essentially what they were doing, they were buying people, right?
Selling people.
Yeah, they were buying people from those people at the detention center. So I got bought by a Libyan guy and went to his home. I did his chores.
You got bought by him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did the chores. I cleaned his room, washed his car. He would send me on errands and stuff like that.
Did you ever try and, I don't know, probably this is quite naive, but, stand up to him in some way and say, like, what are you doing?
I couldn't.
You couldn't, it was too scary, too dangerous.
That would have literally been a death sentence for me. He would have shot me. He had an AK-47 rifle, he had pistols, he had...
There's no way out.
Yeah, there was no way. If I did that would literally have been the end of my life. I couldn't, but I did try to escape and I succeeded.
Sorry, wants to say
no, I just want to ask the audience, because you've been really, really understanding. How many of you here have moved houses, moved flats?
Maybe raise your hands.
Just raise. Right. You know what it's like, all your stuff to pack them and move. There's only one connection between you and these guys. That's the emotional bit of some of the things that maybe you leave behind, but you leave with a lot of stuff. These guys, when I try to do the story, I did a kind of living with, for all intents and purposes, I try to live like them, do everything the same way. All these guys have when they live in. It's that rucksack behind their back, one mobile phone, a little bit of cash, and maybe their address book, and one picture. Most of them do have photographs of their loved ones. That's what keeps this journey going. When somebody like him sitting here now is leaving and saying goodbye, I can tell you, that it's about 20. It's 20 people on his case, or 30 people who depends on him. He's not just living alone, he's living with these people, and then they come to a place like this, and nothing has changed. To go back to your question, nothing has changed. I know people who I was with who are still in this country undocumented for over 15, 20 years, waiting. That's the challenge. That's the damage that is being done. It's not even just the journey. It's what's being done to people like this. They left and they have that one picture of that loved one, a group picture of the loved ones, hoping, thinking, feeling, believing that yes, they're going to turn everything around. And they come here and they tell them, okay, we're going to process stuff. Right now, as we're sitting here, over 26,000 children between the ages of 18 to 24 who are born in this country are undocumented. Why? Because their parents are undocumented. And do you know what that means for those children? And they're born here. They can't get medical, they can't get driving license, they can't get passport. So, all we're saying is that sometimes, whatever little noise we can make for people to understand, I'm not saying all migrants, I'm not saying open the doors, I'm not saying all migrants are good, but at least, can you imagine if your lives were put on pause like this for 15, 20 years, not knowing where you're going, being there in limbo? So that's the challenge that these guys live with day in, day out, not knowing what the future holds.
Sorry, go on. Go on.
Sorry, just to add, if you want to finish your story, but I just wanted to add to that, which is that if people are wondering why someone like Yankuba comes, where there's no war in the Gambia, but extreme poverty, which is its own violence, Yankuba will probably be able to explain better, but adding on from what you said, the social pressure to leave if you're the oldest son is like probably what it was like to go to war in the Second World War or something. If you don't leave, you are socially ostracized. So these young men are suffering so much pressure from sort of like many family members, and when they get to Europe, their family members think that Europe's paved with gold, and then they come up against these enormous difficulties, and a deep-rooted depression takes hold, and they're so ashamed tend to be so ashamed to tell their family.
And that's why it's incredible that you can talk so openly about your experiences, which is amazing. So thank you for sharing that with us. And actually, it's good that you mentioned this because you've told us a bit, just a microscopic piece of your journey, which is horrific. But the problem is when people arrive here, you're starting life from scratch. It is so difficult. We have a problem already with lonely. We have a minister of loneliness in this country. I think it's one of the first cities maybe in the world that has appointed a minister of loneliness. People are struggling a lot with PTSD when they arrive because of the trauma they experience. Just last week, I live with someone who works with young refugees, and 3 of them tried to kill themselves, all under the age of 16. A 14-year-old trying to kill themselves, there's clearly a problem. And it's, when they talk about loneliness in the UK, it's mainly about locals. So imagine what it's like for migrants who might not speak the language, don't know anyone, and like you said, even if you get your papers, it takes forever to find a job. And having a job gives you a sense of purpose and it makes you feel like you have some kind of dignity and confidence again. I want to ask, before I go on too long, what does it mean? I don't know who to ask this to, I guess. Maybe you guys, maybe Charlie. What does it mean to integrate? How can we do it better? And, how can we help people once they've actually arrived?
For me, it all comes down to opportunity. So you talk there about employment. The unemployment rate among refugees in the UK is 70%. It's 4% among local citizens. That's despite the fact that about 3/4 have degrees, like yourself. We see in our community of about 350 refugees that about 60% of them have started or managed their own businesses, and yet the majority are unemployed. It's a huge loss of potential, and it comes because we're not giving them access to the connections, to the legal rights, and to the networks they need to move forward. And what's so frustrating about these kind of stories is these are complex individual processes that can be solved by simple policy changes. And that's what's so irritating and frustrating. In the UK, the cost to the government for giving the asylum seekers the right to work is almost nothing. In fact, it is proven that it will almost certainly, in the long term, be a benefit to the state and to our society. If we allow people to integrate, we know that the costs and benefits for our society are overwhelming. And so the frustrating thing when we're having this conversation is these are stories that don't need to happen. We know the answers. Integration is a conversation that we've had, a dialogue and a debate that we've had, and we now know how to solve it. So why are we still going through these conversations and creating these stories that don't need to happen?
I think the media has to be, I mean, the very media I work for has to be held accountable here, because the stories about migrants are never told as a whole.
Hyperbolic,
Yeah,
and they're very
you know, so clearly it makes it for some of the host people we come across, because of what has been fed about who migrants are, what sort of people, what diseases, what they carry, how aggressive they are. You know, so people don't even want to integrate. I mean, I'm talking about at that lower level. People are scared. They see migrants. I used to walk in the streets here, and you know, because I was like a zombie. I was doing 3 jobs, 22 hours a day, and
you used to sleep on the bus, right? Or
yeah, I used to, when I finish while waiting, and not the best of jobs, working at cleaning the underground station at night, working at Burger King in the morning, and then working at Blockbuster. But then when I'm waiting for my other shift, I will sit in the bus and drive and you know, and go with the bus from Trafalgar Square to you know, one end, and then I change again and come back until my next shift is meant to start at Ealing Broadway. So, but then I walk around, and it's been said on the news, in some of the documentaries and reports, that migrants are always high on drugs and stuff like that. People don't know that I'm just dying of exhaustion, and I walk towards them, and you know the way I was being treated. So the media owe it as well to actually educate the people to say, excuse me, there's another side of these people, and that has never been told, and this is why you have this kind of gap between our host people and the migrants who come as well. So the media has got to do a lot better, especially, I mean, when Brexit was about to happen, we had all these stories about 800 migrants died on the sea trying to come and stuff like that. And so already the hosts start thinking, oh, they are coming, we've got to stop them. So it's always, and right now we know that the decision is being made that the first people who are going to start suffering with this new decision is the migrants who are going to be thrown under the bus. That's the new decision. So, I mean, it's...
Sorry to interrupt. No,
Sorry.
you can finish. No, please finish. Is that it? No, I just wanted to, you know, because I've been given 5 minutes, so I have to do the, you know, put it out to the audience if you have any questions. But just, you know, what can people here do to get involved to help? Because a lot of people ask me like, how can I help? I can't leave my job. You know, how can? Yeah, go on. You can ask this. You can answer this.
No, I just wanted to add on that it's the media, which is fuel, and politics and the media obviously are joined. So it's much more about your vote and the political decisions that you make, and don't be brainwashed by what you read, or don't be kind of gripped by fear when people are just human, just like you, and just kind of like take a look at the guy selling you your bikini next time you're in Tuscany on holiday and wonder what's going on, and vote with your heart rather than vote with fear.
Thank you. Do we have time for people to, yeah, 2 minutes. Okay, if anyone has any questions, oh great, already. If they're outrageous, that's also welcome.
Yeah, I hope this isn't tough to outrageous.
We might, do you want the microphone? Yeah. Thank you. Could you pass it? Thank you. Oops, sorry.
I kind of had 2 questions. It's okay, so I'll try to be really fast.
Yeah.
One of them, you were talking about children. Like, what proportion of migrants, in your experience, are, say, under the age of 18? And if you were saying that it's because the first son is encouraged to leave home, then why is it that we're seeing so many so many children who have no help or assistance who are coming? And then the other part is, since we're talking about integration and some of the biases that people have, I think the elephant in the room that people tend not to talk about is to what extent migration is associated with religious extremism. And so if we could get over that and actually talk about whether or not that's actually a thing that people need to worry about, then that's something that the media should be talking about. Is it actually a thing, or is it actually something that people don't actually need to be worrying about? Really,
is that your question
yeah.
about
Yeah.
religious?
Yeah. To what extent is in your experience migration associated with religious extremism, or is it not really something that is a factor? And also, to what extent why are so many unhelped children,
In this situation?
in this situation.
Who wants to answer that?
My experience clearly is that I will say this country, when it comes to religion, is very tolerant, to be honest. I have been in while making certain films, I've been in places like Morocco. I know what I went through with the migrants. To a large extent, we know the whole terrorism stuff, but I don't think you will find many migrants saying that the reason why they are not integrating is because religiously they have doubts because they think they are Muslims. In fact, to tell you the truth, you have more, because most of the people who come to Britain in particular are people who come from the Anglophone countries, not Francophones. Most are the Anglophones, English-speaking countries, African countries. Of course, you have the Arab parts of the world. But those who come, quite a good number are Christians. So I'm not sure the religious side. The question about the children is not quite clear, but that age range I gave is just about 18 to 24. But below that, there are tens of thousands of children, again, who are undocumented. Again, just because their parents are not documented. I don't know whether I understood.
No, but they can come because if the child is sent or trafficked or smuggled here, then they've got more chance of getting documents, and then if they get refugee protection, they are entitled to bring their whole family.
Right.
Which might change after.
Which it will change.
Yes,
Which will change.
it
It will change today, tomorrow.
Tonight. Yeah.
Now.
Now, very literally right now. I actually, just to answer your question, I think also it's, there is that aspect of religious extremism. People use it as an argument and talk about it, and there's this kind of fear-mongering. But I think the main thing people...
Don't talk about it, that's the problem.
Okay, well, I disagree. I think people focus a lot on, what religion they are. They'll be like, this Muslim migrant has done this or whatever. But I think the main concern for people is really the economic burden. Well, they see it as an economic burden, having refugees, migrants coming here. When actually, really, if you look at history, it helps the economy in the long term. But we always think short term. I'm talking about the politicians.
Also, Yankuba and Fata are Muslims. It's just because they don't look like Muslims that they don't get. It's it's just all.
I'm so sorry, guys. We only had time for one question. But if you want to talk to any of the panel after, I'm really, really sorry. But if you want to talk to anyone, you have any questions, please feel free to, come talk to us afterwards. And also, I wanted to quickly mention, Yankuba got into Bangor University, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. So congratulations.
Yeah,
if anyone wants to, help, because he's trying to raise funds for it, if anyone wants to help towards that, then please talk to one of us and we can get your email and figure out a way of doing that, because it'd be wonderful to be able to help.
Do you want to ask Yankuba, maybe, have you got anything else you'd like to add?
No, not really. I mean, thank you for the audience. I'm a little bit surprised that Her Majesty is not here, though. That's a little bit.
You what?
Her Majesty, the Queen, is not here. But
That's
that's pushing my luck a little. That's pushing my luck.
Prince Harry's gone off.
Yeah, but thank you for the audience. I really appreciate it. First time in London, it's been amazing. I really love it.
In the short space of time.
Yeah, I mean, I did meet the rain though.
Yeah, you've seen the rain,
So
the terrible
typical
weather.
of London.
No, thank you for coming all the way.
Yeah. So thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it, and do have a lovely evening.
We're going to go down